I'm Marissa SherKenney, and I am the founding director of Bozeman Montessori. Here at Bozeman Montessori, we serve children from 6 months to 6 years, so through the kindergarten year. We have 3 classrooms. We have our Nido classroom, which serves the 6 months to between 14 months and 19 months when they're ready to transition to our pre-primary classroom. And they're in pre-primary until we see they're developmentally ready to make the transition to primary. So that's for usually around 2.5, 3, right around in there. And they move up to primary where they stay with us through their kindergarten year. We are licensed to serve 49 children, and we have been a STARS program at STARS Level 3 for several years. We were established in August of 2013, though of course the work to establish started well before that. So I began the search. I think I got the idea about in 2011. I think it was kind of came into my mind that I wanted to start a Montessori program, and really just to be able to have a high fidelity program and to be able to show what that is like in our community. And began the process, but of course there's a lot of obstacles when you're looking for a location. There's a lot of requirements around having a licensed program, and so after a long time of looking, we actually ended up finding somebody to do a build-to-suit lease agreement. And so I was able to design the building to get it kind of customized to what I knew we wanted for these children. And so that's why we were able to have these beautiful windows that are low to the ground. We have customized bathrooms that are child size, sinks that are low, all of these pieces that we were able to do. Now, of course, in hindsight, we would have done more, and we've changed things and adapted as we've gone, because you just need to be able to do that. How do you make it feel like a home environment as much as possible, even though we are in a center? So we do have our napping space that's separate. Now, if you noticed in there, there is one conventional crib, and that's really, it's an evacuation crib. We really felt like that was an important safety piece to have at least one like that. But the other sleep spaces that we have are, they're called lotus cribs, but they're it's like a pack and play, but they're lower to the ground, and they have a zipper on the side of them so that the adult, if the child can crawl, they could crawl in independently, and then also the adult could sit next to them to rub their back in that way. Once they are over 1 year of age, we do use the licensing variants that parents can sign to allow us to let a child sleep on a mat on the floor. And that's another part of Montessori, to be able to have floor beds. So children can move themselves freely into their space, and when they wake up, they don't feel confined. And so the reason why when you're in that environment you don't see as many beds is because we actually do use mats once they're over the age of 1. In that space. Then we have our eating area, just like you would in your living room with your children. You want to be able to have a space where they can all sit together, and they have their food that comes out. They actually do have a plate and cutlery that they use. They have a cup. The cup in that environment is actually a very small little metal cup. It's almost like the size of a shot glass, so that the child could hold it safely, but they can start to practice drinking independently versus having a bottle or a sippy cup to do. Of course, they are very little, and some of them still do require a bottle and somebody to hold that. So that's the adult rocking chair, to be able to still give a bottle for that nurturing comfort. But the children do sit at those small tables and eat as independently as they can, which is all you can do just to be able to get there. Our shelves are low, and the materials are freely accessible to the children throughout the day. So whatever they're interested in exploring. Some of the materials are materials that you might buy or find anywhere, and some of them are very specific Montessori materials that have a particular way to use that. And that doesn't mean the children have to use it in that particular way. It just means the adult shows it in that particular way, and the children then explore. And most of those are really about teaching concepts like object impermanence, or object permanence, rather, versus impermanence. So teaching object permanence, or other pieces where there's a developmental lesson that is there for them to explore freely, or fine motor control, gross motor control, those types of things. We also built our small sink in that environment, which we're really proud of, where the children can stand independently and they can use the hand crank in order to be able to wash their hands. Of course, they'll wash their hands, they'll splash the water, they do all the things that babies do in that space. And so we really do love our little sink. In our NIDO classroom, we serve children from 6 months to between 14 and 19 months before they move on to the next classroom into pre-primary. So once those children are stable on their feet, they're ready to move into pre-primary, and that's just the term we've come to call it. Some Montessori schools will call it a young children's community. Sometimes they'll call it a toddler community as well, although they're not toddling at that point. So in that room, it's also about the children interacting with each other, feeling that sense that they can care for themselves and others. And that's a big part of what we call practical life in Montessori. And that's going to be true both in pre-primary and then here in the primary classroom that we're in as well. And that's where children can care for the plants, they can care for the animals, they can take care of themselves, whether that's getting themselves a snack or doing something for the community like baking bread all together. And so there's ways that we're able to do that with those young children where they can feel like, oh, I've accomplished this. There's small places where if there's a spill, they can pick up, they can know where the cloths are and they can go clean up a spill independently and then put them in the hamper. Or if they need to use the toilet, they can communicate that. Even if their language skills aren't there, they have ways they can at least to go over and communicate that. Also in the pre-primary classroom, we have our language shelf. We're mostly at that stage of development, we're talking about oral language, but having real, genuine objects that reflect the material so that the child can go through what we call one of our language lessons in order to be able to learn the accurate names of the objects they're interacting with on a daily basis. We also have artistic expression in that space, a variety of mediums that they can play with and work with, and still within the context. So even at that young age, even NIDO and again in pre-primary, they're able to select something from a shelf, take it to a table or a work mat, work with it for as long as they want, and put it back. Montessori is known for having very particular ways they work with the materials, but once again, the children do what the children do. And one of the ways that we start to know that they're ready to move from pre-primary to primary is they start to put things back. They start to use them as they're designed to be used, and they start to put them back where they actually belong because they're starting to have this awareness that that there is an order and that other people are interacting with that as well. And it's that awareness of others that is one of our big indicators that they're now ready to come into this larger primary community. One of those designs by accidents, serendipitous things that happened is that I didn't know a lot about infants and toddlers when I built this space. And so I had one room for both of them, which then we put up a divider between. And it's turned out to be this wonderful serendipitous experience where now the infants can look over and see the pre-primary children engaging with their environment. We've found that makes the transition between the two environments really smooth. In addition to just the transition where the child feels emotionally connected, they're ready to roll once they get in there. We've seen children walk into pre-primary on their first day, pick up the glass with their name on it and go get themselves water because they've been waiting for their chance to be able to do something like that. We also, one of the things that we chose to do a few years into existence here at Bozeman Montessori is we chose to switch from disposable diapers that the parents provided to a cloth diaper service. And so we provide a trifold cloth diaper for all of the children that are here. And we did that for a couple of reasons. We figured we're here to meet children's developmental needs. And one of the ways that we can do that is by allowing infants and young children who are just in that early toileting phase to be able to experience what it's like when the consequences, if you will, of that sensation that they experience in their bodies. And so while that means that we have to change diapers a lot more frequently because they do feel that wetness, they get that neurofeedback of what that sensation has produced within them of wetter soil. In contrast to a disposable diaper, and when you think about a disposable diaper, they do their job really well. They wick away that sensation of wet. They get that water away from the children, which is wonderful and allows them to be able to feel comfortable in that, but doesn't give them that neurofeedback that they've just had, that they actually urinated or defecated. So that's one of the reasons that we went for the cloth diapers. And then we transitioned from a diaper, when a child starts to get that feeling of wetter soil, into training underwear. And so then instead of going for like a pull-up, they go into training underwear, sometimes with a shell and sometimes not, depending on the individual. But that way they can independently pull it down. And that's when they're in the pre-primary classroom and have access to a real toilet as well. So that gives them that skill and confidence when we do find children very successful with cloth. And then they come into the primary classroom. So once we're seeing that children are showing that awareness of others, they're able to kind of have a little bit more self-control. But in that, it's really, we think of it as the development of the will. Like there's a span of time where children start to be able to just, even though they want something, they can kind of hold that impulse and be like, oh, maybe this isn't the best for the good of the community. And that's a big part of what we value and want to really show children, is that it's important that they follow their own developmental needs within the context of community. So you talk about coming into a primary classroom, and it's quite large. There's a big space that's in here. And that big space is designed for a multi-age group of children to come together. So they're coming in at 2.5, they're staying through their kindergarten year, and we're really able to embrace all of those changes that happen in that big span of time. The room itself is divided into several areas. And so we practical life, which I mentioned in pre-primary, where the children are able to learn how to care for their environment or themselves. They learn how to care for other people as well. And that's a really big part. Now, in addition to those pieces of practical life, those skills, they also get to get gross motor and fine motor skills, and planning and sequencing are all built into the practical life lesson. So it's got these multiple layers of gifts that it gives the children. We also have the sensorial area, and the sensorial area is designed around the development and refinement of sensory perception. So children always, we all know, right? They're taking in the sights, the sounds, the smells, everything's coming into their psyche. Montessori calls it absorbent mind. Sometimes people call it just children's brains like a sponge. But really, the sensorial area is designed to help them sort out all of this information that they've taken with real and accurate language. So we talk about the visuals, form with the geometric solids, color with the color tablets, and we can sort those out where they're able to explore those and get that accurate language. This is red, or with a different color language, with a different level of the color tablets, there's a gradation. This is the reddest. This is the darkest, this is the lightest. To be able to get that information, to be able to build that foundation. One of the really fun things I think about the sensorial area, by getting really accurate language and really clear mental categorization in the sensorial area, is that is the basis for the power of abstraction. To be able to create, to be able to visualize something in your mind, and then imagination can launch from there. So, also another example of the sensorial area is this material that's behind me, which is the Montessori bells, and that's working with the middle C scale. And so children can play them, but one of the pieces that you can kind of see this, they can move those bells. So they can put them into a gradation, they can match them. There's 2 sets, so they can be able to get that information of like, oh, does this match? Does this sound right? All Montessori materials are built around the idea that there's a built-in control of error. So they don't need an adult or another child to come up to them and say, oh, you had that wrong, or we're gonna fix that. There's some way built into every material where a child can figure it out for themselves whether they have actually gotten to kind of the conclusion or the ability to be able to know that they got it right. And that's what we want for life, you know. You don't need somebody to always tell you if you're right or wrong. You want to be able to know that it feels right, that you feel like, okay, I feel accomplished. I got this. And maybe they did, and maybe they didn't. It's not important. It's that feeling of, I can do it. I can figure this out for myself. That's what's important there. With language starts just like in pre-primary with oral language, real and accurate language, precise language. So this is a dog. This is a Labrador Retriever. This is a standard poodle. Whatever it is, whatever the child's interest is, we want language cards or materials that meet that interest to captivate them into the beginning of loving learning and loving language. So that is whether or not they can read yet. There's ways that we're always providing that context. And then we start reading, if you will, with writing, which isn't always the way people think about it. But if you think about learning phonetics, children can start to put words together in a way that they might be able to build a word before they could ever read a word. It's coming from them, once again. So there's a context for them to be able to have that information. one of the materials that we have in Montessori classrooms is called a movable alphabet. So once a child knows that this letter has this sound, they can start to move these letters about in order to be able to build those words. They may not have the fine motor control to hold a pencil and write that shape, draw that shape in the beginning, but they can just pick up these letters and move them from place to place to build a word. The cursive has that natural curvature, so a child, typically when they're first learning to write or draw, you'll see more of a curved lines within their ability to hold that pencil. But there's also kind of the fact that a lot of our children are moving on to conventional education, and that ball and stick is really, they need to be able to have that information. If a child learns with cursive and gets the opportunity to stay with Montessori, they visually will be able to drop the serifs, the lead in and the lead out of every cursive letter. One of the aspects of Montessori math material, that I love, is that, well, one is just it's meeting the child's developmental need for order. Math is really great, and children love order and they do thrive in it, and the environment is designed to foster that order. But math in particular has this lovely order to it that children can really gravitate towards. But many adults are really intimidated by math, and one of the reasons is because we've asked people to make the jump from not knowing anything to abstraction, and that's not what we're asking from the children here. Here we're giving them the concrete. So all of these mathematical materials are designed to give them something that is physically tangible to be able to grow. The numeral rods, which are also next to me here, start with a rod that's just this length, and then it grows, which is actually 10 centimeters to be more precise, and then it grows to 20 centimeters, and it's differentiated between a red piece and a blue piece, and then 30 centimeters, and it's a red piece and a blue piece and a red piece. So they can actually touch it and feel the length of numeration growing, and it continues from there, whether we're talking about the decimal system with the golden beads, or whether we're actually going up to fractions. Everything's got a tangible material so that they can learn that, and it gives them the concrete and then the passage to abstraction over time. We actually have a full food program here that we're also really proud of, and the children get to engage in making snacks. We serve snacks and lunch, and the children can be involved with the processing of that by having the kitchen directly in the classroom. So in addition to designing our interior environment, which has a lot of pieces that go along with that, we also had to think about our outdoor and how are we going to incorporate these different ages that we serve into an outdoor space that is relatively small, really, it's one city lot to be able to have for our outdoor space. And so when you look at our outdoor space, we actually have the fencing between the younger children's play yard and the older children's play yard has that wiring so the children can at least see each other interact while still meeting the no more than 4 inches gap within the fencing, all of those regulations that are so important for safety. We wanted it to have a natural feel, so there's a lot of plants that are there. Each tree, we wanted to think about leaf shapes because in our Montessori classrooms we have our botany cabinets where we actually talk about the different shapes of leaves. So we wanted to have those represented in the plants that we have out in our play yard. We also wanted to be able to have some uneven surfaces for the infants to be able to walk on. And so that's why we have the hills that have been built into the space so that there is that and some natural places for them to climb, which is the rocks. And then we actually built a climbing boulder as well for the older children. But then we also know that swings are really important for vestibular stimulation, and so we wanted to make sure we had some of those even more conventional pieces that we could have in our space. There are many parts of what drew me to this work, and some is just the love of children, certainly. And there's a kind of a larger piece where I have a belief, it's kind of a core belief, that if you're able to meet people's developmental needs, really just to be able to allow them to develop into who they genuinely are, that they will innately serve the betterment of the world and bring about the world will be a better place for that opportunity that they've had. And I think that's true in all early childhood education, and it's something that we're very conscious of. And not trying to decide who that's going to be, but allowing them to flourish. You can actually see that core belief embedded in our logo, which is the fiddlehead, the fern head, and as the fern head will naturally unfold, But you don't force it to. All you do is create a supportive environment, and it will naturally become who it is, with all of the extra layers of the symbolism of community built within that, because there's so many fiddleheads within fiddleheads, little spirals unfolding within itself.